Let's look at some airspace information. This is another part of review, some new material, but it's good to always look over this. So for Class B airspace, we're looking at sectional and TAC, terminal chart area, the diagrams for these. You can see that they're very similar. For the sectional, which I'm going to focus on mostly, it's Class B airspace for this example. We have required notes if they're shown, and only airspace below 18,000 feet is going to be shown, because 18,000 feet and up is Class A until you reach like flight level 600. Then everything above that becomes Class E, but again, everything below 18,000 feet is what's shown in our chart, so that's what we're going to focus on. So Class C airspace. Class C, Class D airspace are very similar. You want to see the notice to airmen for effective hours, because they can turn into possibly Class E or Class G airspace during after hours, or there just might not be a control tower active during certain hours. So that's with Class C. Remember the floor and ceiling, this is how it's going to be described. Sometimes it'll say surface, just like if we look at Class D airspace. Remember, Class D airspace is just a single kind of tube that goes up. So it goes from the surface to some number, and the some number is going to be in this little broken box right here. So this means it goes up to 2,700 feet. If there's a minus sign in front of it, it means it goes up to but does not touch 2,700 feet. And this is very common. If there is a solid little boxed out area, it's going to exclude up to a certain height. So Class D is excluded below 1,500 feet MSL. That means if you were in this area and you were, like, let's say flying in this blue box with your UAV, you could fly up to 1,500 feet MSL and you wouldn't be interfering in Class D airspace. So that's Class C, Class D. Let's look at Class E. It's a bit of a longer portion. So Class E airspace, and actually let's go back and look at all of these really quick. Class B airspace is shown with a solid blue line. Class C airspace is showed with a magenta solid line. Class D airspace is a broken blue line, and then Class E airspace is going to be typically a broken magenta line. So you're going to have solid blue, solid magenta, broken blue, broken magenta. That's how I like to remember these. Class E airspace. The limit of Class E airspace is shown by the magenta lines. We just talked about that. If we look to the right here, we can see that it's boxed off again, and so Class E airspace is excluded below 1,200 feet MSL. For Class D airspace it was 1,500 feet. For Class E it's 1,200 feet. So similar boxing area, similar reasoning, but just different height levels. Now, you know how it's a broken magenta line? There's a few cases where it might not be. It's going to be a shaded magenta if you go from 700 to 1,200 feet AGL or higher. That would all be shaded magenta. You'll also have a shaded magenta with the Class G lettering under it if you go from 700 feet, that's your surface, up to Class G airspace. And this is an AGL, of course. You then have your shaded blue, and your shaded blue is not when you're starting at any of these 700 feet AGLs, but if you start at 1,200 feet AGL now. And another requirement is that it touches Class G airspace. So again, shaded magenta if you're 700 feet starting, and then you're just going up. Shaded magenta with Class G under it if you're starting at 700, that's your surface, and then you're going up but you touch Class G. And then you're just going to be completely shaded blue if you start at 1,200 and you go up and you touch Class G, and that is all in AGL. When our ceiling is less than 1,800 feet MSL, we have a ceiling showed with the limits. So you have 14,000 MSL, and then you also have 8,000 AGL. These aren't two different values, they're just measured in two different ways. So 14,000 feet is mean sea level, and then 8,000 feet is above ground level. That's just important distinguish to note. Sometimes they'll give you both values, sometimes they won't. We're going to look at different frequencies now. So that's going to be this first part, VOR, which is very high frequency omnidirectional range. You also have low frequencies and mid frequencies. So those are just important acronyms to know. You can see specific routes here. You also have miscellaneous air routes that are shown here. Flight information. You have offshore control areas as well, and then foreign airspace, which is typically limited on how much information it gives. You're going to have special conservation areas, which you're not supposed to be flying in, because it could be like a national park, and you also have national marine sanctuaries, and you're not going to want to fly in these either. I mean, you can, but you're not supposed to fly below 1,000 feet AGL, because that would disrupt the law in place. So if you're going to fly over any national marine sanctuary, you have to be above 1,000 feet AGL. We have SFRAs that we're about to get into. These are different types of special flight rule areas. So example, you'd have this for national security, and you have it blown up on the right side that you can see. You have TFRs specifically relating to national security, and this is with just a broken line right here. You can see inside of this circle, this middle part right here, you have a prohibited 40, so you're not supposed to fly in here at all, and you can't fly outside of it, inside of this outside broken circle, because there's a temporary flight restriction. Typically you could, but because of the TFR, you're not able to at that time that it's in effect. Let's look at more SFRAs. You have flight restricted zones related to national security. It's going to look like our special use airspace chart. So you have PRW, that's going to be for prohibited, restricted, and warning. These are areas that you need ATC authorization to fly in. Alert areas you don't need, but you do need to be on alert if you're flying through there. And then you also have MOAs, military operation areas. You can see again is our box. The little box here says that it excludes airspace 1,500 feet and below. So you're able to fly your UAV in that area. You have national security areas, special awareness training areas. You have your mode C, which we briefly touched on, just very briefly. We have your air defense identification zone, or ADIZs. And this is just a line with a bunch of dots on top of it. And you'll have special air traffic rules or airport patterns. In these areas, it's just going to be a box with little hashes on the edges like this. You do need ATC clearance before entering this area. So you can think about it, since it's for airport traffic rules, you're going to need ATC, which is air traffic control. There's some other important things to note. We have high energy radiation areas. So like solar farms would be a good example. You can think of it as just the sun. You have your sporting events, TFRs, so if there's like an event going on, you can't be flying over people, you can't be flying over events like this, so there's going to be a temporary flight restriction in effect. You have national defense airspace, where you have TFRs for this. This one is going to be in red with the slanted little hashes, kind of like the airport patterns, but this is for national defense. You have your VR and your IR, 3 numbers afterwards if it's above 1,500 feet, 4 numbers if it's below 1,500 feet. So these are for military training routes. If you have special military activity routes, it'll have the height it starts at and the height it ends at, as well as some other information possibly as well. Space operations. You have IFR routes, miscellaneous activity areas. They're basically all fixed wing planes with a letter on top of it. Aerobatic practice area has an A, glider operations, G, hang glider activity, which is an H, ultralight activity, which is a U, so that's very small planes. And then you also have unmanned aircraft activity, which is U, and it's represented with a UA. You then have parachute jumping areas. If there's a frequency, it'll have a number right here, the frequency they're operating at. And then you have space launch activity area, which is basically just a giant spaceship. You then also have permanent continuous flight restricted areas. So something like Disneyland would have a circle around it. You can't fly there, ever. You have VFR transition routes, which are represented by arrows in the direction that they'd be transitioning. You have unidirectional, so if they're only going one way, or bidirectional if there's traffic across both ways. And lastly is our TRSA, Terminal Radio Service Administration. Terminal Radio Services, so these are provided for pilots. The area that they're in effect is going to be around this gray line. It's going to be inside of it. So you have the name, boundaries, the different sectors, as well as the floor and ceiling at which it operates at. That was a lot. So in the next video, we're going to look at navigational and procedural information. From there, we have like 3 more sections, and then we are done with the VFR section for Part 107 study.